Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ancient Literature. I hope that you guys got into the Julius Caesar play a little bit and actually found something to enjoy about it. This is pretty exciting that we're embarking on this for our last 2.5 weeks or so. We're coming up on finals week really quickly. So I want you to make sure you have read Act 1, Scene 3, the last scene of the first act by Friday. That was technically due today, but I will quiz you on that as well as the first two scenes of Act 2. That's all in that first bullet point. I know you might be like extra confused by like scenes and acts, but keep in mind this is a 5 act play, just 5 acts, and each act has, I guess, like 3 to 4 scenes. There might be one with just two. But yeah, so this shouldn't be too long. Depending on who you are, maybe this will be boring. I'm not sure, but it's not too long, and it is the first thing we're reading that's actually we're reading it in its original language. Even when we read Sophocles, that was a translation. Virgil was a translation, obviously, right? A great translation if you like Fagles, but translation nonetheless. Now we are actually reading English, so that's kind of cool. Let's see. Next week we're gonna finish. You need to have finished Act 2 over the weekend. We have a long weekend, right? We have like a 4-day weekend since we don't have school on Monday. So I need you to finish Act 2 so that on Wednesday we can read the beginning of Act 3 on Zoom. We're going to do another Zoom session next Wednesday. I think probably the same time. I might throw up a poll either today or Friday to get some feedback on if 11 ish seems to work consistently. So we'll do that on Wednesday. I want people to start thinking about what roles they would be willing to perform. People are generally going to want to turn their camera on. Feel free to wear a funny hat or costume. Or if you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be Julius Caesar and I'm going to get myself like a laurel crown, do it. And then we'll have all the more reason to let you read JC's lines instead of like, it's like, oh, who else wants to do JC? Then we have to like flip a coin or something. So let's have fun with it. If you know the play, I'm not sure why you would. This is kind of what people probably would expect as the climax. It's not actually the climax, but for people on the street who don't know what's up with Julius Caesar, they would expect that this is probably like the last thing that happens, the part we're going to read on Wednesday. So we'll do that, and then maybe we'll read the ending of it the following week for one last Zoom session, and then that last full week we'll be finishing the play as well as prepping our like study guides for the final. All right. Let's get into this, guys. This is pretty exciting. We open up with a super interesting and engaging scene between this Flavius guy and Marulus guy, who are talking to some commoners about how the commoner is a cobbler. So let's see. Let me get into my Cockney a little bit. Okay. Thou art a cobbler, art thou? Truly, sir, all that I live by is with thee all. Okay, I had to look up all. That's apparently an ancient, well, maybe it's current, I don't know, a cobbler's tool for making shoes. Pretty fascinating stuff, guys. I'm being a little sarcastic. Obviously, this isn't the most exciting way to open up the play, but if it helps for you to read it, go to town, guys. Honestly, like, you can give your parents a disclaimer, like, hey, if you hear me doing a British accent in my room, it's for literature. So yeah, like these are supposed to be Romans, but also, British people 500 years ago would have been performing it in this context, and I don't think they would have been trying to do some kind of weird like Italian accent or something like that. And I don't know what the accents were, but I have been to the Globe Theater. Okay, the current Globe Theater is near where the old one was, and saw Macbeth there. It's pretty cool. Okay, so they're talking. They're talking about how this guy is a cobbler. It's very exciting. And then they have this weird exchange. This is only like the second page of the play, so they do start getting into some interesting things. So the second commenter is saying, indeed, we make holidays to see Caesar and to rejoice in his triumph. And Marilla says, wherefore rejoice? What conquest brings he home? What tributaries follow him to Rome to grace in captive bonds his chariot wheels? And he goes on and on and on. Knew you not Pompey? Many a time and oft have you climbed up to walls and battlements, to towers and windows, yea, to chimney tops. blah blah blah, to see great Pompey pass the streets of Rome. And when you saw his chariot but appear, have you not made a universal shout that Tiber trembled underneath her banks? So what point is he making here by saying like, oh, you're excited that Julius Caesar is about to be celebrating this Lupercalia, which we'll talk about in just a second. He's like, well, did you used to be excited when Pompey did stuff? When you saw Pompey pass in the streets? I bet you were excited back then. So what is he drawing attention to? Hopefully something that you remember from my lengthy video on Monday about how Pompey was basically the last opposition to Julius Caesar. Pompey was the general that the most of the Roman senators sided with when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon 5 years prior to this, and Pompey lost to Julius Caesar in Greece at the Battle of Pharsalus, and then was promptly betrayed by Cleopatra's brother when he went to him for aid after that. So yeah, this is just kind of an interesting thing. I mean, it tells us about whoever this Marullus is, whether this guy's going to be important or not. It's telling us at least some people in Rome are not happy with the status quo. Now, as far as we know historically, people actually were generally kind of coming around to Julius Caesar, even though his entrance into their lives or re-entrance into their lives was chaotic. It eventually led to some peace and some stability. So even though he was part of the problem with all the civil warring going on, obviously a big part of it, Rome was really partly just kind of interested in stability. And so, yeah, there are people like Marullus walking around historically at the time, but there were also people like the commoner who were just kind of like, whatever, like Julius Caesar, like, yeah, sure, like things are calming down. There's not a war going on within the city right now, so like on that level, I'm happy. Okay, so he's just kind of making a point there. Kind of interesting. Okay, moving on a little bit. Let's see. Oh, Flavius just like tells him to get out. He's like, "Get on out of here, you commoners!" And the commoner's like, "Sure." And then I like that last little bit to the lower right that Flavius says, "See whether their basest metal be not moved. They vanish tongue-tied in the guiltiness. Go you down that way towards the capital." So he's just kind of like justifying to himself. He's like, yeah, their basest metal isn't moved at all by any of my words or the point I'm trying to make. But they're guilty. They know what they're doing. They know that they're disloyal in terms of one day being pro Pompey, the other day being pro Caesar. Okay, we get into some interesting stuff. Marullus and Flavius are talking about taking down some decorations. They're like, take all this stuff down. It's stupid. It's stuff that is celebrating Caesar. What Flavius is saying there, be hung with Caesar's trophies, all about and drive away the vulgar from the street. So do you too, where you perceive them thick. These growing feathers plucked from Caesar's wing will make him fly in ordinary pitch. Who else would soar above the view of men and keep us all in servile? So these people hate JC. They really don't like him. And what is happening in the city right now? Well, it's Lupercalia. Lupercalia is a festival usually celebrated in mid-February that has to do with purification, and it also has to do with what is called the Lupercal, which was thought to be the cave that Romulus and Remus were found with the she-wolf. Lupa in Latin means like she-wolf. So this was a February festival. Rome had a bunch of festivals, most of which we don't know. Saturnalia just happens to be the one that people kind of pick out as the one to be talked about. But keep in mind, Ides of March, that is the middle of March. So we're opening our play in the middle of February. So it looks like we have about a month. Keep in mind, my notes in the lower left, this year is 44. This is the year that JC will be assassinated. That's not really a spoiler. You guys should probably already know it, and the crowds in London probably would have known it. Even though pretty much everybody could go to the play, and in terms of class, there was not so much division in terms of who was actually in attendance. Even the most meager of educations would probably grant you some information going into this. You would probably know that JC gets killed by so and so and so and so, and I almost like don't want to bring up all the specifics so that at least there's some element of not surprise, but yeah. So same for you guys. It's kind of like Oedipus Rex, how everybody in the audience of Oedipus Rex would have known what the irony of Oedipus Rex was inherently. Okay, anyway, this is 5 years after JC crossed the Rubicon. Remember, he had to spend almost 2 straight years going around all the Mediterranean cleaning up the mess that was made by him kind of going to war with Rome. This includes defeating Pompey, Pompey dying, him basically leading to the defeat of Cato, a guy we might talk about. uh, a honeymoon with Cleopatra, helping Cleopatra fight her brother off and become the leader of what's it called, Alexandria. A lot of stuff, but recently things have finally kind of calmed down. And JC is about to go off on another campaign to Asia. Ides of March, as far as we know, was about a day before he was to leave on a military campaign. Let's make sure we're doing well with keeping up with the dramatis personae. So JC, that's a weird picture of him where they're supposed to reconstruct what he actually might have looked like. So there's kind of an uncanny valley thing going on there. He looks creepy, but he is 56 this year. He's getting up there, especially if you consider he spent the last 10 years of his life, 10 plus years, fighting tooth and nail in France. Leading his troops through all of France against French and German tribes. And then recently, the past 5 years, hunting down fellow Roman senators. Ooh, so he's had a very intense, middle aged kind of lifestyle, if you will. Calpurnia is his Roman wife, a bit younger. We know her to actually have consulted people like soothsayers and diviners who would tell her the future based on Roman superstition. Um, Brutus. This is Brutus. There's a Decimus Brutus who shows up in a scene, but we'll just call this guy Brutus when that guy's around. He's the main Brutus. He's the one we care about. He is 41, so he's younger than JC, but he comes from an old family, an old Roman family just like JC, and they would have gotten along really well. They would have known each other, and we know them to have been friends, basically. Brutus was you could almost describe him as seeing JC as a mentor figure. That random book in the lower left, Triumph of Caesar, it's from a great series of books, of novelizations of this kind of historical period. And I always think that you guys should get into those books. They're pretty good. Pretty good. I don't even like books, and they're actually like fascinating. There's like 20 of them. Yep, I think that's the one where Caesar, that's the one that's happening at the same time as this play. Okay, Cassius, he's 41. He's going to be talking to Brutus in the next scene. So he's about the same age as Brutus. They're both basically like freshman senators, as in like they're kind of like newly made men in Roman politics. Cleopatra, unfortunately, is not so much in this play. If you want to read about her, you can read Antony and Cleopatra, which is the sequel to this play in a weird way. She's 25. She's even younger than Calpurnia. JC totally did have, like, as far as we understand it, to be a honeymoon with her a little bit before, like a couple years before this, and she will come to Rome periodically and stay in a palace just outside of the city limits. That is kind of a rule in terms of a foreign leader like her, a foreign queen or king, coming to Rome, that they stay in a palatial location outside of the city limits. And so Calpurnia surely has to deal with some of the rumors flying around about, oh, like JC is totally hanging out with Cleopatra all the time, and there's ideas that Calpurnia couldn't give JC a son, which was kind of true. Cleopatra actually did, or was in the process of that. Mark Antony is going to show up. He's 39, so he's about the same age as Brutus and Cassius. And Mark Antony there, played by somebody from the famous movie in the 60s about Cleopatra, is that's Julius Caesar's top soldier. He goes back with JC to his days in Gaul or France, and he stayed in Rome and kind of watched over things while JC was running around the Mediterranean, killing all of his opposition, basically. So Mark Antony is like his top dog, his right hand man in a lot of ways, and eventually will one day come to blows with JC's godson over the right to take JC's spot. And there's Cleopatra, played by the inimitable Elizabeth Taylor. Cleopatra was Greek/Egyptian, so having a British woman play her, maybe not super accurate, but really none of those actors should be looking like that. Okay, back to, I think this is scene two. Scene two. There's this weird thing where it's like the very first thing we hear Caesar saying is, "Stand you directly in Antonius's way when he doth run his course. Antonius, Caesar, my lord. Forget not in your speed, Antonius, to touch Calpurnia, for our elders say the baron touched in this holy chase shake off their sterile curse." That's so. If you've ever seen what's it called? My Fair no, it's Mary Poppins. Dick Van Dyke has a horrible British accent, so I'm channeling him. It's just like fake Cockney. So it's he's saying that Caesar is concerned about Calpurnia's ability to bear him children, which back then, in terms of medical information about things, who knows if it was JC's fault or who knows. But he's saying that there's this weird idea that if Anthony passes by her, it'll help her fertility. Very weird. But then just after this, we have this weird encounter with the soothsayer, and this is one of the famous lines from the play. Soothsayer says, "Caesar." She says, "Ha! Who calls?" Casca is or Casca is a senator who's going to be coming up. "Bid every noise be still. Peace yet again. Who is in that press that calls me on?" This is Caesar. "I hear a tongue shriller than all the music. Cry, Caesar. Speak. Caesar is tuned to hear." And then he says, "Beware the Ides of March." And he goes, "Well, what man is that?" "A soothsayer bids you beware the Ides of March." Brutus is like narrating. Caesar's like, "Set him before me. Let him see his face." So Caesar wants to look at this guy. Once again, the guy says, like, one more time, "Beware the Ides of March," which again, this is just the 15th of March. And Caesar says, "He is a dreamer. Let us leave him. Pass." And they just leave. So for whatever reason, this like almost seemed to trigger JC a little bit to the point where he like wanted to look on this person. Um, uh, so yeah, um, he's he simultaneously is intrigued, and also he's like ready to just kind of keep moving with his party there. That's a nice illustration of this scene. Uh, and yeah, he's going to celebrate Lupercalia basically. Okay, and then later in this scene, or it's a new scene. I need to start labeling them. We have Cassius and Brutus having an exchange, and it's the first time we're hearing from them. So I'm sorry to say I will dwell a little bit on everything they're saying because I mean I could spend like an hour close reading everything they get into, but it's establishing one of our what we could argue is kind of weirdly the hero of the play. We'll kind of see how things go, but it seems like the hero is not going to quite be Julius Caesar. But is it Brutus? That's kind of going to be a question, and we will grapple with that as we go. But yeah, let me just take some time going through a lot of what they're saying, and then we'll basically be done for today. I'll say some things about Cicero so that you understand him in time for the last scene of the act, or if you've already read that, hopefully I can contextualize it a little bit, but then we'll be done. Okay, so Cassius, "Brutus, I do observe you now of late. I have not from your eyes that gentleness, a show of love, as I was wont to have. You bear too stubborn and too strange a hand over your friend that loves you." Cassius is saying, like, "Hey man, what's up? Like, you're cool. Lately you seem a little distant. What's going on?" If you have trouble extrapolating that from the actual script, I don't blame you. Learning how to read Shakespeare definitely takes some time, but hopefully it's something that's a little more intuitive than reading Sophocles' translation or even like a lot of Fagles maybe. Hopefully. If it's not, do the best you can. I had almost no luck finding versions online with footnotes. Um, but yeah, sometimes you just kind of have to like let it wash over you. Like you might not know exactly what a character is saying, but you hopefully are maybe like picking up a little bit on the mood of what is being said or the tone. Look for whatever you can in terms of direction from the script in terms interpreting it, and yeah, like reading it aloud really does kind of help. Brutus replies, "I may have a veiled look. I turn the trouble of my countenance merely upon myself. Vexed I am of late with passions of some difference. Conceptions only proper to myself, which gives some soil perhaps to my behaviors. But let not therefore my good friend be grieved, among which number Cassius be you one. Nor construe any further my neglect, that poor Brutus, with himself at war, forgets the shows of love to other men." He's saying, like, don't worry about me. This is some personal matter I'm working through. It's a shame that some of my friends like you are perceiving it as though I am being neglectful. Cassius says, "Then, Brutus, I have much mistook your passion. By means whereof this breast of mine hath buried thoughts of great value, worthy cogitations. Tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face?" "No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things." Cassius says, "'Tis just. And it is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow." I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus, and groaning underneath this age's yoke, have wished the noble Brutus had his eyes. Okay, what are they saying? Cassius is saying, I wish you had the right perspective to see the gifts and the value that you have that maybe is obscured from you right now. I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus, and I guess he's saying like some people are envious of you. They think you have a good head on your shoulders. Brutus says, "Into what dangers would you lead me, Cassius, that you would have me seek into myself for that which is not in me?" So Brutus is kind of saying like, "Whoa, now, like, don't be saying all these things about me, how I'm like this great guy, and I just don't have the right kind of mirror to see what is great about me. It might not be there, so don't lead me astray here." Um, and then Cassius goes on. Cassius is kind of just being a good friend in a way, but does he have ulterior motives? Since you cannot see yourself so well as by reflection, I, your glass, will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. And be not jealous on me, gentle Brutus, were I a common laughter, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester. If you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard, and after scandal them, or if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous. What is he saying there? I have no idea. I don't know. I'm kind of kidding. Let's see. Let's try to break this down here. Be prepared to hear. So, okay. I promise I'll pick up the pace after this. That of yourself which you yet know not of. I guess he's saying is like, well, there's some aspects of you yourself which you don't understand. You don't know yet. You don't know thyself well enough. And then this part gets really weird. Were I a common laugher? I see laugher. Or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every. So he's like, if I was just a random dude, um, then let's see, then this shouldn't mean much. But like, I'm not. I guess he's saying like, I'm not just some random guy. I don't just say things just to say them. Okay. Let's pause there for a second. I'm gonna gather myself. Last little bit, and then we'll be done. But Cassius tells this interesting story. I'm just gonna go through it real quick. Once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber, chafing with his shoals, Caesar said to me, "Darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood and swim to yonder point?" So he jumps in the water with Caesar there. And then, but Caesar cried, "Help me, Cassius, or I sink." Caesar starts to drown. I'm in the middle on the left column. I, as Aeneas, Cassius says, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear, so from the waves of Tiber did I the tired Caesar. And this man has now become a god. He's saying, like, once I helped this dude literally keep from drowning, and now he's a living god, basically, which that'll become official after his death that he is going to be thought of as an actual god. But yeah, he just sees this kind of disconnect there and this tension that he's not okay with. Let's see. Brutus and Cassius, they're presumably while they're having this conversation, they're kind of standing outside of maybe a temple where which is one of the stops on Julius Caesar's little parade. He's going around the city, visiting various parts of the city for Lupercalia, and they hear something. They keep hearing like a ruckus, but they're not sure what it is. And this last little thing I want to read because they're talking about virtue, and that's going to be interesting. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, actually, that whole side. So Brutus says, "What is all the shouting? I fear the people are choosing Caesar for their king." Now, what was he even saying here necessarily? He's alluding to something that we have historical sources on, which is on Lupercalia. Julius Caesar was like symbolically offered a crown by Mark Antony, as in Mark Antony kind of went up to him and was like, "Oh, Caesar, take the crown. We bestow upon you the crown." And Julius Caesar was like, "No, no, no. Like I'm not a king. Like I don't like kings. I'm a good Roman, in that I am anti-king and monarchy." Which is ironic because we know that Julius Caesar at this point has already bestowed upon himself the positions of imperator, which basically means that he is this dictator figure, and yet he's saying that's different than him being an actual king. We have historical information for this, and if it is true, then he probably would have gotten Mark Antony to do. He would have told Mark Antony, "Hey, like offer me this crown symbolically, make a big show of it." and then I'm gonna tell you no 3 times. Anyway, so that's not what Brutus and Cassius know to be happening right now, but this is already something that's in the air. They're expecting that this is the kind of thing that is happening at this time. That Roman people who are willing to be a fan of JC are straight up at the point where they're offering him full kingship and sovereignty. And Cassius says, "I, do you fear it? Do you fear him being king?" And Bruce says, "I would not, Cassius. I love him well. But wherefore or why do you hold me here so long? What is it that you would impart to me? Why are we talking out here this whole time and loitering? And I will look on, set honor in one eye and death in the other, and I will look on both indifference." So he's like, "You can tell me whatever, and it's fine. Like, don't beat around the bush." Cassius says, "I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I know your outward flavor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell you what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as life not be as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself." Whoa, Cassius. I was born free as Caesar, so were you. We both have fed as well, and we both have endured the winter's cold, as well as he. Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus. And he goes on and on. He's like, why are we petty men meant to walk under this hulking giant? So he's still not quite like Brutus is like, hey, get to the point. Like, do you have some kind of like aim in this discussion? And Cassius is still kind of doing this like fancy rhetorical, less than direct type of speechifying. He's like getting at the fact that Caesar kind of annoys him without being super explicit. Let's see, halfway through that left column, we're almost done. This is the last text we're examining here. And this is why we have to do it on Zoom, people, so that you can avoid me just going over the script and pouring over it like this. Let's see. So, what should be in that Caesar's? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is a fair name. Sound them. It doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them. It is as heavy. Contra with them. Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. So he's just saying like these names are the same, which is a weird. It's like a semantic point. He's like they're literally both names. They're just names, and it's like well sure, but words are just words. This if you know Romeo and Juliet well, you know like wherefore art thou Romeo? Like why are you Romeo? Arose by any other name? That kind of stuff. It seems to be evoking some of that, which he would have already written that play by this point. Rome though has lost the breed of noble bloods. When went there by an age since a great flood, but it was famed with more than one man. He's saying like there's room for more people. There was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. So that's actually really interesting. One of the last things at the very bottom of the lower left column, Cassius is bringing up the fact that Brutus has this ancestor who was a kingslayer, who banished the guy on that coin right there, Tarquin. So Brutus knows his people to be pro-republic, pro-democracy, anti-king. That is literally in Brutus's blood, and Cassius here is evoking it. All right, let me work my way back to where we actually were. Let's see. Okay. And then their conversation kind of comes to a close. But Brutus says something kind of interesting right at the end. Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under these hard conditions as this time is like to lay upon us. He's saying, as far as things are going right now, I'd rather just be like a farmer. I don't really know if I have a head for all of this, but he's from this older family, so it's kind of beset upon him to be a major figure right now. And then we have this last little bit down here. Caesar and Antony are talking. And Caesar has this aside with him. He's like, what are those two guys doing over there talking? Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Let me have men about me that are fatter than Cassius, which is just a very weird way of saying that, like, something about Cassius kind of strikes him as odd. And Antony says, fear him not, Caesar. He's not dangerous. He is a noble Roman and well given. Yep. And then Caesar, let's see. I mean, that's about it. SB marked himself scorn of spirit. Oh, he goes on. He's talking about Cassius. He reads much. Cassius reads a lot. Caesar says, lower right. This is the last text box. He's a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men. He loves no play, as thou dost, Antony. He hears no music. He doesn't like have a taste for music or plays. He seldom smiles. He smiles in such a sort as if he mocked himself and scorned his spirit. That could be moved to smile at anything. Such men as he never at Heart's Ease. So he's just saying this guy seems like kind of unsatisfied. He seems kind of like focused on some bigger picture, and it's just interesting that Caesar is actually kind of like picking up on something going on with Cassius over there. All right, you guys are going to read the final scene if you haven't already, and then you're going to work on ahead a little bit beyond that. So just real quick, some Cicero 101. What's going on with Cicero here? He's 6 years older than Julius Caesar. He's a statesman and orator, so politician basically, currently a senator. He's known from the 60s, so over 20 years before this. He's known for putting down this conspiracy that my Latin kids are sick of hearing about, the Catiline conspiracy. This guy, Catiline, wanted to burn down Rome, and Cicero kind of sniffed out the plot and had a lot of the men punished while he was consul, which is like the Roman version of president. And there's 2 presidents at a time. So Cicero's still he's still known for that. That was still his like big defining moment, even though about a decade later he was actually kicked out of Rome for doing it, since he executed some of the conspirators too quickly. But his reputation has kind of generated a little bit. One thing to keep in mind, he initially sided with Pompey. When Julius Caesar was crossing the Rubicon, Cicero was on Pompey's side. But JC didn't, use this as a reason to like have him executed or something. JC was pretty merciful in terms of pardoning people. So Cicero is very active in the political scene, less so than he is now. I mean, less so than he was, but still to some extent. And though he was at one point on bad terms with Julius Caesar, that has kind of subsided a little bit. We know he didn't like Julius Caesar as a person. JC was very corrupt and fast and loose, where Cicero is all about rules and laws and all of that. So Cicero is going to have some lines in the next scene. Okay, there's that nice painting again. And once again, if you want to pause it on this reading, whoops, I just totally passed it up, in terms of where we're going to be. And last thing, just found out, I should be at the school on Thursday between 11 and 1 o'clock. So during those 2 hours, and maybe a little bit before, a little bit after, I think I'm going to put a box with let's see. This depends on if I can get into Miss McCullough's room, but I believe I will. So let's just say I'll put it in the form between the hours of 12 and 1 o'clock, very narrow window, and there's some leniency if you communicate to me. You can come by the school on Thursday and get a hard copy. If you know that, like, it's like, hey, I probably actually would read this play if I had the hard copy, but I don't, so, like, I'm just going to skim through the URL PDF link. If that, then please try to come get a book. It'll be there on Thursday. More details in the form. And, yeah, maybe, yep, it'll be, like, in a box in front of the door. At the very least, it'll be somewhere, like, right at the front of the school where you'd walk into that foyer, which leads into like the office and all of that stuff. The box will be right outside of those front doors, and it should be clearly marked. I probably won't worry about checking them out, but just know that you're going to be responsible. If you take one, you will be responsible for returning it in about like 3 weeks, right? Anyway, we can totally do that. All right, I will talk to you all on Friday. Okay.